So if you've been working as part of a team doing some work on PDIA, sooner or later you're going to have to report on the kind of activities that you've been doing, and someone's going to ask you to provide an account of why you've spent your time and your money doing what you've got to do. Most of what you've heard about from these videos and in reading our book is largely articulated at the level of broad principles, and that's as it should be, because most of the people who are working in the PDIA space are working in different countries with different problems, with different time frames and different constraints and opportunities around which they are trying to make their agenda work. And so we didn't want to be too prescriptive in that particular space. And that's true, I think, in the space of reporting on what you're doing. So I'm just going to articulate some general themes that I think it's really important to be aware about, and we really much want to learn from you, the teams that are doing this kind of work, on how you figured out how to report on what you're doing to those people around you, those people who manage your world, and to those other constituencies perhaps who are looking to you for some inspiration or some guidance on how to make this work. The first people you obviously have to report to is your immediate team, but perhaps also those just beyond your team in your work organization who are perhaps a little intrigued or bemused or perhaps even shocked by the kind of work that you're doing. And having a good account of what you're doing to those people in the first instance is really important, because perhaps you'll have to add some new team members along the way. Some other people might be wanting to just ask questions about why exactly you're doing what you're doing. And it's important that your team members are all on board with exactly, or more or less exactly, why you're doing what you're doing. At some point, one of those team members might include someone from the financial office or from a budgeting team or a procurement team, and they're going to want to know why exactly you've spent the money doing the activities that you have. Now, there isn't a right answer to that per se, and we're not going to try and articulate that here. What we are going to tell you, though, is that different groups that have been working with PDIA have started the process of writing their own toolkit, their own process of taking these broad principles and then writing them in ways that reflects the specific situation, the specific country context, and the specific problems that they're working with. And I think that's an important task that your team needs to take seriously, because once the money and the scale of activity that you're working on increases, that burden only increases with it. You can't absolve yourself ultimately of being able to be responsible for the money and the resources that have been entrusted to you. So trying to work from the principles we've articulated in this course to very specific, concrete guidelines for how your team will stay together, how it will report on its activities, and how it will explain itself to those people who may have no particular interest in PDIA per se, but are faithful professionals doing their job. Their task is to make sure that money isn't misappropriated. Their job is to make sure that contracts are written in the right way. And it's your job, I think, to figure out how to do that in ways that are in compliance with your organization, but that are also trying to stretch that organization perhaps in ways they haven't already thought about. In our experience, at least, it turns out, I think, that people who are really good at being able to manage budgets and procurement turn out to be people you should get to know pretty quickly, because those are the people that can really help you, if they are on board, with being able to figure out what is legitimate and non-legitimate by way of the using of resources. Being innovative means that you will fail, and it means that a large part of what you do probably won't work out. So working with the people in your organization that can help you to explain that and to be able to do that in ways that are faithful to the principles and the rules of your own organization, while also stressing that, recognizing that the very process of being innovative means that sometimes the activities that have taken perhaps a lot of time and a non-trivial amount of resourcing just kind of didn't work out the way that you wanted to do. And so I think figuring out how to report that to your own team and your own colleagues who work on these particular issues in the first instance is really important. Other people that you'll have to report to sooner or later are your management, your senior management, whether the authorizer who has given you the space to do this kind of work. That person is, as we've stressed many times, is really important in terms of protecting you, but you've got to help them help you. You've got to be able to give them an account of what you're doing that helps them in turn to be able to answer perhaps to people further up their food chain that may be indifferent or even hostile to the kind of work that you're doing. So taking the reporting components seriously within your own organizational space is a really crucial task for this work. It's not necessarily the sexy and glamorous part of this work, but if people have given you money with lots of zeros in it, then sooner or later you have to expect that you will be held accountable for that. And doing that in ways that is faithful to the spirit and the principles of PDAA, but that are also in keeping with for the most part, often the very good rules and regulations that govern a bureaucracy, is a really important task. The final group that you have to account to are external constituencies, people who are looking to you perhaps for inspiration in the work that you are doing, or who are potential other funders of the work that you are doing, or people who are wrestling with a similar kind of problem perhaps in a different country or even a different part of the country, who are in a different authorizing space but may nonetheless be looking to you for guidance on how to do that. That would be a different kind of reporting structure. People who are working in those kind of issues are more interested perhaps in the procedures and the impacts that you've been able to generate. But having, again, a plausible account of how you've been able to do that is important for your own records. It's also important as part of this process we've talked about of building a global community of practice that is engaging in this work. Some of this really does have to be learnt from scratch, and there really does have to be a process of reinventing the wheel each time. But there are things that we hope a community itself can learn about how to initiate and sustain these processes in ways that work for larger communities of people. And so figuring out how to write about and articulate your work in ways that are useful and coherent and compelling to external constituencies is the third component of this reporting apparatus. But ultimately, we are hoping to learn from you about how to do that. We would love to be a repository for different examples of how people have engaged in this reporting process. And in that process, we think we can be faithful to this idea of PDIA-ing PDAA, of being able to learn how to do something we don't yet know how to do, which is to report on very dynamic and innovative and creative ways of experimenting within a bureaucratic space. Hopefully over time, as a community, we will figure out how to do that, but we're looking to you to help us how to do that.